fancy myself an intellectual. Actually, about 26 years ago, I had an idea, and I went to my boss who I was working with at the time, and I said, I had this idea for a series. And he said, that sounds pretty good. When you get it done, let me know. 26 years later, I'm going to attempt it. Okay? And it's not that I've avoided it because it's a tough series. I've avoided it because up to now, the contrasts didn't really come as clear to me that we're going to talk about. And what I'm talking about is from a book in the Bible called Job. I'll just walk you through a little bit of the background of Job and what it represents. First of all, it's by many considered the oldest book in the Bible. A lot of people feel that Job, this poetry, was put in verse before the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy were written, which are known as the Jewish Torah. We're not sure who the author is. The author might actually be Job, or it might be someone who took these verses and this poetry that was handed down verbally and put into place. There's actually a silly kind of theory that came out in the 1800s called the Wellhausen theory. The Wellhausen theory basically said things like the book of Isaiah was actually written in the 5th century by an ambitious, Jewish scholar and things like that. It was basically taken to discredit Scripture. The book of Mark was never written by Mark. It was written by an ambitious monk in the 12th century. And, things like this, all these kind of theories. These have since been blown out of the water because we've actually proven that many of these books were actually written from the time that they actually took place. Job's one of those books, though, that might have been an oral history that was actually put in print or actually written out during a time of what we know in Israel's history as the period of wisdom literature. And the period of wisdom literature is around the time of Solomon. The Jewish nation was at its absolute prime. A lot of the wealth of the world was making its way to Israel. And at that time, a lot of wisdom literature was written. The book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, and the book of Job. And so it's quite possible this was recorded then, but it's quite possible it was written much older than that and then was passed down. We believe it was that Job, or we understand Job to be what we call a patriarch. A patriarch, I know patriarchy is kind of a negative word these days because it's normally associated with evil things. I do not agree with this way of thinking, but patriarchs were basically these people that lived between the time of Adam, or the time of the flood in Noah, and the time of Abraham when Israel started to be established as a nation. When we hear Job, these lists of people that existed, some of the traditions, some of the ways of worship, the nationality of his friends, these date from really, really old times. In my studies in history, we often tend to think of the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire, and then we'll take a step back and we'll go, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and all that kind of stuff. There's actually quite a bit of history centered around Persia and Babylon and those kind of things. They go back another 2,000 years, and we have all kinds of interesting stuff written down and all kinds of history there. I mean, we're talking about old people, peoples and nations and things like that. That's fascinating history when you read back, because they all had the account of the flood. They all recorded the creation story very similar to what we understand in Genesis. Like, all those things date back at that time, and a lot of the literature of that time is so biblical. It really is. And so when we think of old, we think back in that time, and this is probably around the time that the book of Job happened. And then Job is basically centered around this age-old question: why do good people suffer? Why do good people suffer? And it exemplifies the idea of human choice within suffering. And so we're going to touch upon that. What happened to this guy? I'm just going to cut this down because I want to encourage you to read this book. It's a long book. It's about 42 chapters long. It's poetry. If poetry is not your thing, and it's generally not mine, it may seem tedious at first, but I'm going to introduce you to ways of looking at it in the next few weeks that will open your mind and your heart, and I want you to have a look into it. First, Job was a wise, good, and rich man. He was one of these individuals. He was very wealthy. He was very good. He had a family. He lived an exemplary life. And in the heavens, before the throne of God, a discussion begins. And And an individual comes forward known as the accuser. We call him Satan. And Satan, God says to Satan, have you seen my servant Job? He loves me. He trusts me, and he's a good man. And the accuser points his finger at him, and he says, well, of course he is. You give him all this good stuff. But you take his stuff away, he's going to curse you in your face. And then God does something that many people struggle with. He gave him permission to take all this stuff. And so, this discussion leads to these changes in Job's circumstances. The first wave is this. Everything outside of Job is attacked and destroyed. All his wealth, all his possessions, his children are killed. He had 10 children, they're all killed. And all of it disappears. In a day, he goes from the richest man in the area to a penniless man. But he doesn't curse God. And then there's some time that goes on. We don't know how long. It might have been weeks or months. And God is at his throne again, and the accuser comes forward again, and he said, look, Job hasn't sinned. You were wrong. And the accuser says, it's nothing. If you take away his health, you protect everything around him, but if you take away his health, he's going to curse you. And God said, okay, have at it, but you must not take his life. So Job gets really sick. His body is covered with boils and sores. Those of you in the medical field can probably relate to what boils do to people. They're incredibly painful. They're debilitating. They're horrible. And Job's body was covered with these. And he sat down in the ashes and basically mourned. But he did not curse God. When his friends hear that he's gone through this, they all come to comfort him. And as good friends do, they come and they sit with him and they mourn with him in silence for 7 days. They actually start out pretty good. These are good friends. These are rich men, these are powerful men, these are wise men like Job. They come and they sit with him. Then Job starts to talk. And after he talks, his friends respond. And this was a question I told the senior pastor of the church I worked with back then. It was basically this. We know that Job was a good man, and we're going to see a little more about him in the weeks to come. But I said I was reading what his friends say to him. And you know what I noticed about what his friends said to him? It sounded really good. His friends' arguments tend to make a lot of sense. I says, I'm reading through them, I find myself agreeing with them. The things they're telling Job seem like common sense, or seem like wise sense. And so I told that senior pastor, I said, I want to do a study and discover what is it about the three friends and what they said which God disagrees with. Because we know later in the book of Job, God actually accuses these friends of sinful thought and a warped way of looking at himself. And I thought, wonder why? You know, they sound like they really know what they're doing. And so I sat down, I did an intensive study, and over the years I've gone back to it, and I've come back to it, and come back to it, and that. And I ended up, basically, with, I'm going to talk about the three friends. There's another guy that kind of jumps in later, and he's kind of an Elihu, and he's kind of a young guy, and what he says kind of mirrors the other guys, and so I'm not going to allude a lot to him. But I'm going to talk about Job's three friends, and the things they say, and then I'm going to focus in on where I think their way of thinking goes wrong. And what I'll do is I'll invite you to look in with me, and like I said, this is going to be a real brainy series. And I think you guys are up for it. I really think you are. There's a lot of deep thinkers in this congregation, so this is going to be one that's really going to tickle your brain and help you get around things. But hopefully, it's going to prevent you from jumping into some of the snares which are so easy to jump into in life. Okay? And so here's the three friends. The first one is Eliphaz, and Eliphaz is a mystic. He's a mystic. Next week, we're going to talk about mysticism. Eliphaz is an intuitive feeler. He's someone that has a deep sense of the spiritual. Yet he takes that to an extent where it's warped. The next one is Bildad. He's a legalist. A legalist who has his list of rules and laws and things like that, and comes forward with this argument about right living and how following the rules and doing the right thing is always a good thing. But for some reason, he goes wrong. And we're going to be talking about legalism. And then the third one's Zophar, and he's a pragmatist. He's the youngest of the three. He's the one that comes up with some really good blanket statements that don't always hit the mark. I heard someone once say, for every complicated problem, there's one simple, totally wrong answer. You ever hear that? For every complicated problem, there's one simple, totally wrong answer. Anytime I look at a situation, oh, it's easy, they just need to do this. Chances are I don't know the whole picture, right? And probably for us too. But we like to jump to simple conclusions to complex problems. We really do. And so many of us sit and politicize or sit and look at things and think, if someone would just do this, everything's going to be solved. Well, that's over. And we're going to talk about how to approach that and things. When you're done this series, did I skip a slide? Selena? Yeah, okay. Can you go back to that? Here's kind of what you're hoping you'll learn in the next few weeks. Okay? The first thing is this, is we're all part of the larger narrative. What is going on with you, you probably sense it's connected to the world as a whole, but you're not sure how. And we all yearn to be part of a greater narrative. You know, there's got to be more to life than being born, growing up, going to school, getting a job, retiring, and dying. All of us have this deep sense that there has to be something, a grander vision, a grander narrative that's going on. And we all want to be part of it, even if it's dangerous. And I am a proponent in believing that there is a grander narrative. There's something that this whole world is involved in, a direction it's moving. The second thing is that in their narrative, there's horrible suffering. A lot of people would like this one not to be true. But it is true. If you have not suffered, you will. And if you have suffered, you will suffer again. Suffering is a part of this life. Our desire is that God would take away all suffering. But for reasons that I will allude to in the weeks to come, suffering is not only a part of life, it's a necessary part of life. And it's also a part of life that God can take to do something in our hearts. And you say, well, isn't that sadistic? You know, God, let me go through this, or I lost this person, or this kind of thing. It's not that I'm saying God deliberately sets out to cause suffering. He doesn't. But God does use suffering. He works in suffering. And there's something happening in suffering that enables us to have the strength to go on and overcome. Okay? Third one, over that narrative, there's a good, just, and holy God. A lot of people say, if there's suffering in the universe, how can God be holy and good and all-powerful? We're going to talk about those different kind of things. The last one, the next one, He is our only hope through that inevitable suffering. God is our only hope through that inevitable suffering. And so when we're going through that suffering, we do need a good and powerful and just God. And instead of denying Him, the actual opposite is true. It's at that time we need Him more than anything else. Suffering is a temporary test and be overcome by faith and determination. I just talked about that. And this one, there is a happy ending. There is a happy ending for those who overcome and endure suffering. There really is. Okay? And we'll talk about that as well. All right? You up for it? All right. I'm going to first of all talk about Job and just bring three practical things forward. And then we'll just take a little bit of time and we'll take some questions and stuff before we head into the series and get into the real meaty stuff in the weeks to come. The first one is this, we know Job's going to survive this. We know that at the end there's going to be a happy ending for him. But where Job is, he doesn't know that. Right? He doesn't know that. So I want to talk about three aspects of this guy that I hope stand out to you. I hope they stand out to you because here's the thing. If we're going to suffer, if suffering's inevitable, what can we do to position ourselves best to be able to survive and see ourselves through suffering? Because Job was prepared. Now, he would probably tell you when he was in the middle of it, he didn't feel prepared. But there's things he does, both before and in the middle of that suffering, that point to someone who is going to survive. Okay? And so there's actually 100 things about him. I'm going to touch on a few that are principles that I see in this scripture and I've learned, pass them on to you, and then we'll take some questions. The first one is this. The best thing you can enter adversity with is godly integrity. The best thing you can enter adversity with is godly integrity. God did not decide to become good or righteous in God's eyes when he went through the suffering. He entered it that way. You see, faith in Jesus Christ, faith in God, is a preparation for life. Jesus once told his followers, everybody takes these words that I say, and they build their house on those truths. It's like someone who built their house on a strong foundation, a rock foundation. The winds came and the storm blew and it couldn't knock that house down. But he said, anybody that doesn't take these words that I'm teaching you and builds their house on that is like someone who built their house on a foundation of sand. And as soon as the water and the wind and everything came, they knocked that house down. When I'm talking about integrity, I'm not talking about integrity in the worldly sense of the world. A lot of people go, eat right, get your exercise, obey the rules, be fair to people, tell the truth. These are all great things. Godly integrity is different. Godly integrity is where we have a faith in God, and it's mirrored in a life dedicated to serving and pleasing Him. A person who's living godly integrity enters every situation and says, how is my conduct going to honor and reflect God? What will my entering this situation reflect on how I know God loves me and how He wants me to live? Okay? Now, there may be some rules or guardrails or lines that you have around those kind of things. And some of those convictions, a lot of Christians have spent a lot of time arguing over them and really dying on those hills and all those kind of things. There actually are, some really good guidelines and things like that. But when we come to the actual center of the message, is to live for a holy God and to trust in Him and to live the kind of integrity He's talking about. It has a strong connection relationally to who He is. Job enters this situation, that kind of person. Just an example. His children used to have a big party. Job was very rich. And so his sons, 7 sons, would have this big party. His daughters would join them. And they'd have these parties. Parties would last a week long. Now that's a party. Right? Do you know in those days, weddings often lasted for 3 weeks. Now that's a wedding. Where there's food and joy and dancing and everything like that. That's actually a pretty good deal when you think about it. You know what we do? We just kind of have a ceremony, quick dinner. We have to listen to the speeches, and then, hopefully everybody makes it, home on time and all those kind of things. Those days, it was like summer vacation when there was a wedding. They did weddings right, and they did parties right. Job was concerned about his kids. He said, maybe while they're having all this fun, maybe they've sinned, and maybe they've cursed God. So Job would do a sacrifice for each of his children every time they had a party. Because he was asking the question, have my children displeased God? I want to stand in the gap, and I want to honor God in a way that reflects on them. So that's the first thing. Those who enter suffering have entered with godly integrity, are the type that overcome. Job said there was a man in the land of Uz, not Oz, Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Second thing I've noticed about Job, Job had hope. His hope was derived by putting God... Oh, sorry. I'm on to the third one already, and I have to flip the page. That's my last one. When enduring suffering, you have to work outside your own perspective and adopt God's perspective. Perspective when you're suffering, I don't know about you, but when I'm suffering, I just become very inward. I really have a hard time seeing other people. And you probably identify with that. When you get the really bad flu, and like you're crawling to the bathroom, and barfing your lungs out. Isn't that a great visual? This is why we dismiss the kids, right? And like you feel like you're going to die, and you sleep 16 hours, and you wake up, and it's just, and you can't eat, and you can barely bring water down and stuff like that. It's at times like that we tend not to be very loving and caring, right? We tend not to be worried about other people at times like that, right? Why? Because we tend to focus in on me. Because me needs help. I'm suffering, right? But for whatever reason, Job, during his suffering, and we do hear some things that Job says, that identify how bad his suffering was. It's not that he doesn't cry out. It's not that he doesn't complain in some ways. Most of his complaining is centered around why God has let him go through this. And it probably will be with you and I too. But one thing he does not do, he does not condemn God for it. He recognizes that God is his hope through this time. He doesn't sling mud at God. He's frustrated with God. He's hurt at God. But there's still that connection. I don't know, if you're in a marriage or if you're in a deep friendship, probably inevitably in every relationship, there comes a time where that person deeply wounds you. Right? And during those times, some of the conversation can be painful. As you know, the accusations are thrown and the feelings are shared and all those kind of things. And it can be a really brutal experience. But during that argument, there's this undercurrent connection. This yearning that you want in the end to be pulled back together. The fighting for the relationship. The recognition that life without this person in your life is worse than anything you can imagine. This is Job's connection to God. The undercurrent of his trusting God, of knowing God is good and powerful and all those kind of things, stays pure all the way through this. What you instead have Job crying out to God because of the pain he's going through, because he doesn't understand. He doesn't know why. And, just to be honest with you, he's suffering. But he steps outside that to still keep God in his place. And if you find that at your times of suffering, you're waving your fist at the sky, sometimes you're giving seed to a heart of rebellion that isn't going to help you long term. Because while God may be allowing you to be hurt, he's the only hope for your hurt being cured. And that's a paradox of faith. You know, if I can say one thing about the three challenges we're having in the coming weeks, it's this. Is people who tend to be off the path try to make suffering simple. They try to make suffering simple. They say, if you just had my perspective on things, then the suffering would simply go away. One thing I've learned about suffering is incredibly complex. When you are in suffering, every day is a different challenge. And sometimes every day brings new pain. Suffering is not easy. But Job, like the person you're arguing with, that close relationship you don't want to lose, Job has that with God. He's not going to give up on God. But he's frustrated with him. Do you know what I mean? He's hanging on to him with his fingernails. Even though he's disappointed. Okay? And we're going to talk about that. Job said, then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and he worshipped. Here he is worshiping among his suffering. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all this Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. He held on by his fingernails. And then the third aspect. And that is, if I can just find it here. Hope is derived by putting God in your future and trusting him faithfully with determination. Okay? There's something about a person that's had faith for a while. Or something about a person that goes through things where they kind of get this rugged, stick with it kind of attitude. And people like this, we admire them. We don't want to go through what they're going through, but we look at them and we admire them. You know, they go through something, the loss of a spouse, or the loss of a job, or, you know, having to change a career, or having their house burned down, or something. And they put one foot in front of the other. And they go on. And you look at them and think, man, I would have freaked out, I would have checked out, I would have just gone nuts. And they keep going on. Job has this kind of determination. And if I may be so bold, you will never have a lifelong faith in God if you don't grasp this truth. You see, there's something about the first time you go suffering where you go, I don't know why, God, but I'm going to hang on to you. There's kind of this This is really horrible. I don't feel like God's here. Is he there? I don't feel him anymore. I don't understand him anymore. Why did he let me go through this? Why am I going through this? Why won't this stop? Why is it taking so long? You know, it kind of starts with that. Then you kind of phase in your faith through, oh yeah, we've suffered before. Okay, I know a couple things. I know what to do in this and this. I'm still really frustrated. I'm still really angry. I don't know what to do. I'm still confused. I'm still in pain. But, maybe things are going to be okay. Maybe tomorrow's going to be good, and, all that kind of stuff. To this, where you grow into this kind of anticipation. You go, yeah, I know there's going to be suffering. But God has seen me through. And God seeing me through has led me to a place where I'm going to trust him. To where I'm going to trust his blessings. I don't know why, I don't know how, I don't know how long, but I'm here, God. Just talk to me. To this next phase. And this is the one where it can be very dangerous and it can be really good. To where we look at our adversity and you say, is that all you got? I have God inside me. I'm going to take this adversity, I'm going to overcome it, and God's going to do a great thing through it. I've been there maybe once or twice in my life. Planting this church was at one point where I got that. It just had gone through so much adversity and all those kind of things that when we first started, I was fearless. I had no doubt it was going to work. I had no doubt it was going to thrive. I had no doubt what we were supposed to do and all those kind of things. It was a time where I was absolutely fearless. And in your suffering, you may come to a place where you enter adversity with that fearless attitude. Job's not there. Job's going to work through some of the initial phases, and you will too. But there is a chance, or there is an aspect or a growth in handling adversity you can have in your life. Hope is derived from putting God in your future and trusting him faithfully with determination. I know that my Redeemer lives, Job said, and in the end he will stand in the earth. I know God will show up. I trust him. Someday I'll stand before him. I trust him. This one here, this is just incredible depth to this passage. Though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. Can you imagine looking your executioner in the eyes and saying, you can kill me, I'm still going to love you. That's the type of love that Jesus had on the cross. Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. Wow. To ask God to forgive people who were torturing and killing you. That's kind of love slays dragons. That's kind of love is the epic of those who survive suffering. Though he slay me, yet I will trust him. I will surely defend my ways to his face. He knows there's a happy ending. He knows there's a resolution. He knows it in the future. I've been your pastor for some of you 20-something years, and some of you 19 or 18 years, or some of you 10 years, and some of those. I've walked with you in some tremendous dark valleys. And I've seen some horrible things. And some of you, I still wince when I think of what you've gone through. But I know this. We serve a God. That what you lost or the price you paid or anything, that someday God will give you back what you've lost. It may be in this world, it may be in the world to come. But our ultimate hope is in God. And that we will someday stand before him. And where we will understand, or where there will be an exchange made, where we will go, I had no idea it was going to be like this. Paul, who was tortured, beaten, ostracized, gossiped about, slandered, all those kind of things. This guy lived a hard life. I mean, he quite literally went from town to town, getting the snot beat out of him. Sharing the gospel, planting churches, and then going on, running for his life. Like he's constantly on the go and all that kind of thing. He called the suffering he went through, he called these light and momentary troubles. You know what light and momentary trouble is? You run out of mustard. That's a light and momentary trouble to me. No Paul. I mean, he's getting beat up, whipped, chained, all these kind of things going on. Oh, light and momentary troubles. I mean, that is a guy on the epic of understanding suffering. It's almost masochistic. But he understands he's living for a higher reward. He understands that this life is a test. What we're living in this life is just a cover of a book that has many, many pages, probably more than War and Peace. There's an eternity waiting for us with a good and gracious God. And someday we will look back on what we endured in this life, and we won't only just say it was worth it, but we will say, on the contrary, I've been rewarded far more than I ever deserved. Job knows this. Job hangs on to this, and that's something I want to teach you. And that's all I got to say about that. So that's our introduction to Job. Next week we're going to talk about the bad advice his friends give him. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're also going to learn some things about ourselves, and we'll continue on with that. But right now, I want the baskets to go through. There's outies and innies. Do you know how some belly buttons are outies and some are innies? Okay, well the outies go out first, like the belly buttons. They're the ones you take stuff out of. In it you'll find response cards, pens, offering envelopes, all those kind of things. And they're the ones you take stuff out of. And then the innies come around, they're the ones you put stuff in. So anything you give or fill out. If you're our guest here today, don't worry about the offering. We want our service to be a blessing to you, but what we would love is if you want to be on our mail list or put your cell down and get texts and updates from us. That way we'll keep you in the loop of what's going on with Community Church, because there's a lot going on, in this. There's small groups, there's programs, we got some events coming through them, and talking to some people. We'll start a prayer ministry, a men's ministry. There's going to be a couple things like that. So you want to keep in the loop about these things, and you want to get those updates. Make sure to fill it in and put it in. While we're doing that, I'm going to take questions. So we got time for a couple questions. Anybody questions or comments? If I'm going to say it, I better be ready to answer stuff. So if you've got a question today, just put up your hand. I'll be glad to ask. I don't have my cell number up this week, but many of you have it if you want to text in a question. Questions? You all got suffering nailed down? Yeah. Oh, Michael, over here. Thanks, man.
I was puzzling a little bit in my mind about the comment about adversity giving us strength, and I was, having been through a bit of crap in my life,
Yes.
I think sometimes it's the other way around. I think there are people who are prepared for the situation they're going to hit. They hit it, and they come out as strong as they were before, but more assured of themselves.
Okay, yeah.
And there are people who aren't prepared for the crap they're about to go through,
Yeah.
and they come out broken.
Yes.
So we see a lot of broken people.
Yes. Yes.
Because
there's some stuff you just can't prepare for, right?
Well, no, I don't think it's that you can't prepare for it. I think some people just end up running into a wall that they weren't ready for.
Yeah.
There are people who are ready for it, there are people who weren't.
Yes.
And the people who were ready for it come out stronger because they were essentially ready. And there are people who weren't ready for it by whatever random circumstance of their lives.
Yes.
And they need everyone's support to get through it at all, because they're just broken people out there.
Yeah. And you know what? There's something noble about that. That's not a bad thing. I don't want you to feel, thank you for bringing that up, Mike. I don't want you to feel that if you've gone through something and you weren't prepared like Job was, I don't want you to feel lost. Because God redeems. You can make it through this. There is hope for you, okay? But what I do want to do is for those of you who are looking at life and taking an approach to life, and you're kind of coasting along in your faith, or if you're not engaged with God, or you've been holding back, or you kind of enjoy this distance where you got a little bit of the sin, you got a little bit of the God, you kind of interchange them, and life's good, okay? I want to tell you, engage in God with all your heart and work towards living a righteous life for Him. Why? Because you will suffer. And if you enter suffering when you've got that little bit of sin, a little bit of complacency, a little bit of, all those kind of things, always going along, it hits you way harder. Because you don't have that foundation. Right? So if you're in a good place now, or if you're in a place where, put some time in your faith. Grow your faith. Connect with God. Because there's nobody's hand you want to be holding when you go through adversity more than His. Now, that said, and I'm trying to qualify this. Is there any way we could have prepared Job for this? Hey, Job, you're going to lose everything. Your kids are going to be hurt. You're going to lose your health. You can brace yourself as bad as you want. That's going to floor you. It really is. And Mike and Cindy, I've walked with you guys through stuff that I shake my head and not sure I would survive. And you guys did with integrity and grace and that. And You know, I look at that and go, there's some things you can't prepare for because you've never been in them. You've never experienced them. Okay? So I can appreciate that. But I want you to know there's hope for you too. Whether you walk into it with integrity, or integrity is something you're finding now. I've sat with many a person through a divorce. Divorce is like losing a limb. And people that really get close to God through that divorce. To the point where they're looking back at what they went through, the marriage breakup and everything, and they go, okay, I'm going to own this. This part of this is my fault. There's some things I didn't do. You know, just where they have this introspective faith in God, childlike faith in God to go through it. Nothing could have prepared them for that. It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt a long time. It's not easy. I'm not going to simplify it. But in that, they found God. And He walks with them each day through. So there are those kind of things. Anybody else have a question? Oh, Trish.
I just think it's like adversity.
Just wait for the mic so the people on the internet can hear what you're whizzing.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Just God's offering of giving people a chance to redeem themselves when they're in a suffering situation where they will pray and and that's an opportunity rather than always a negative thing. I recently went through something I just kind of like to share. So I have a son who's in Thailand, and he was robbed, had his bank card stolen, and then, just when he thought, he was in a bad situation, he couldn't get any money out of the bank. There was a typhoon warning just last week, and I had a hard time reaching him, and he said it was supposed to hit the island where he was on it the hardest. And 50,000 people fled, evacuated. He was one that stayed, and so I prayed through it.
Yeah.
And had friends pray that the island didn't get hit. People there, all the people that that prayed for the whole island, and lo and behold, the storm passed, and he's fine, and everybody's fine, and. Initially, when I talk to people about that, they'd say, "Oh, he was lucky. Everybody was lucky." You get the thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's people who are not of deep faith. That's where you go. Was it just circumstantial? Was it a coincidence that just passed and it was supposed to hit? But then all of a sudden, wait, if you're a person of faith, maybe the prayers were answered, and then and then. After I did that, thinking that, wow, now I have to be thankful. But really, say, wow, those prayers were answered, and pass that along.
Yes.
But then I think about all the other people that had prayers for more serious reasons than that.
Yeah.
And theirs weren't answered.
Yeah.
And then you start to think,
How do you get your mind around that? Yeah.
Then that's where that's why it's such it's a complex thing. You say,
Suffering is complicated.
Yeah, to think about all of that.
Yeah.
But this Job, I've read Job before, and it is, you have to read it.
It's tough going,
And
yeah.
You think different thoughts every time.
Yeah.
It definitely brings you back to your faith.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I can say something, I was thinking about this week. Job's steps I talk about today help you avoid unnecessary suffering. Okay, and that's the self-inflicted type. Some people just seem to love to run to trouble. Right? And if their life becomes stable, they'll do whatever they need to destabilize it because they enjoy the drama more than they enjoy stability, right? And we all know people like that, and some of us are those people and all those kind of things. Job's steps seem to walk towards the idea that life is there's going to be suffering, but I'm not going to suffer, I'm not going to pursue suffering like it's something I want, right? Okay? But at the same time, sometimes a prayer is answered in one way, and sometimes it's answered in another. So sometimes, and this is a question a lot of people of faith have, why bother praying, right? Does it make any difference? This thing I know. Something happens when I pray that doesn't when I don't. Okay? And so there are times I prayed for a miracle, and miracles happen. In fact, many times. I remember just at one point going, okay, God, you're there. I've just seen so much freaky stuff. You know, it's not all coincidence. There is a God in the heavens. You know, you just get to this point where you go, okay, I think I'm in the right lane here, you know, kind of thing. But there are many times where the hurricane does hit. And the question is it because I don't have enough faith? Is it because I prayed something wrong? Is it because God's out to get me? You know, and that's where it gets complicated. Because sometimes the answer of prayer is a cure from cancer, and sometimes the answer to prayer is a funeral. And that's hard. Because you're kind of like, well, that's not the one I wanted. Right? Or that's not the outcome I wanted. And so we get to a place where some Christians are kind of cynical, and they kind of get, they do these qualifications. Well, I'm going to pray in faith, but I'm not trusting God to do anything. Right? You ever heard those prayers? You know, well, you know, I'm going to pray in faith. Maybe God wants to do it. Maybe God, you know, we kind of get wishy-washy. No, we do pray in faith. And never stop praying in faith. Pray for God's best. Pray for God's biggest, because a lot of times He does. But there are times where suffering still hits you between the eyes. And I don't want you to miss this lesson. It's not that God is trying to crush your faith. It is that God, in His ultimate plan, this grand narrative, is bringing this world in a direction that with all the suffering that goes on around us, that they're still heading towards a happy ending. And you go, what? That's not a happy ending. How can I have a happy ending? You know, I lost so-and-so. Or how can I have a happy ending? I'm still divorced. Or how can I have a happy ending? I'm unemployed. Or that accident still happened and I'm still in pain. How can I have a happy ending? But here's the thing. We trust it by faith, we will, we walk forward, and we come to a place, and I'm going to allude to this in the weeks to come. I remember one time at the college of career group, we brought in this guy. He was 17 years old when he was an athlete, young kid, top of his class, everything. I dived into a pool, broke his neck, and was paralyzed from the neck down. He was 29 when he came into our group. And we remember him sitting and sharing with us. Like, we're all sitting there. They like college, university students. I mean, like, this guy's 29, you're hanging on every word this guy has to say. And then he said something at the end that absolutely has blown me away and never left me. He said, you may think I'm crazy. He said, you're kind of a slur, because, you know, his body wasn't working and stuff. But he said, I'm actually at a place in my life where I'm glad I broke my neck. He said, because I knew myself then, and there's no way I would know God as well as I know Him now had I not been sitting in this chair for the last 12 years. And he said, every day, He shows me new things. This guy can't move. His life's over. Things like being a parent and running a marathon and having a normal job, all this kind of stuff is done for him. And he's sitting there glowing. In a room full of us, you know, sitting there with all our limbs and their health and all that kind of stuff, are going, holy smokes, I think he's serious. You know? It's that thing, and like I said, I don't want to poo-poo anybody who's going through suffering. Suffering is complicated. Suffering hurts. But we, like Job, should never lose our faith, even if it's a little whimper, because that faith stands for big things, and that faith brings about great things in God's kingdom. And we, empowered with the presence of God, will do great, miraculous things. I've seen people healed. I've seen churches planted. I've seen weak people made bold. I've seen people who have gone through horrible abuse turning and helping other people. I've seen powerful, amazing things through horrible suffering, because we serve a great God. We can trust Him, okay? So I want you to know I'm not poo-pooing anybody's suffering or minimizing or whatever, those kind of things. But we can't lose that faith, because a lot of times the miracle comes. Sometimes we get knocked down, we got to dust ourselves off, pick ourselves up and go up. I hope that makes sense. It sounds like I'm saying two things at once, but I'm not. Okay? I'm heading in one direction, and we're going to take the next few weeks and learn. I'm going to find out next week if any of you show up again, whether you're interested to find out any of that stuff. But that was good. Why don't you stand with us? We're going to close this song and we'll wrap up the service.